The English opening is a chess opening which starts with the move c4. It is the fourth most popular chess opening in the world, and one of the first players to use the English opening successfully was Howard Staunton, who was an English chess master and was regarded as the world's strongest player from 1843 to 1851. And the idea behind playing c4 right in the opening is to control the d5 square with a flank pawn rather than using the central e pawn for the same. So the first advantage of playing c4 in the beginning is that you are able to control one of the center squares with your side pawn. And if you see, by playing such a move, your center pawns are still sitting in their home and are safe from any kind of enemy attack. As well as you have managed to control one of the key squares of the center. Now, second advantage of playing c4 is that white can often put a lot of pressure on the queen side. And what are the disadvantages? Well, the first disadvantage is, since white decided to play a pawn on the queen side, white is kind of actually delaying its development as well as castling off its king. And the second disadvantage is that while you are controlling the important d5 square, but you are allowing the opponent to play a very strong move, which is e5, which gives up the control of the important d4 square. Now let's look at some of the main lines in the English opening and understand what are the best moves to play from white's perspective as well as from black's perspective. So the main variations can be classified into three categories. First is the symmetrical defense, second is the reverse Sicilian, and the third is other lines. Let's look at each one by one. So the first type is the symmetrical defense. So when white plays c4, taking the control of the d5 square, black replies with c5. Well, the idea is, black says, even I'm gonna grab some space in the queen side and even I'm gonna use my wing pawn to control one of the important squares, and that is the d4 square. So because both of the c-pawns are advanced two squares forming a symmetry, it is therefore called as the symmetrical defense. Now let's look at some of the main lines in the symmetrical defense. The first one being the symmetrical four knights. So the symmetrical four knights variations start with c4, black replies with c5, and now white plays knight to f3. The idea behind this move is that since black is taking control of the d4 square, with his c5 pawn, white really doesn't want to let go the control of this d4 square. So that is why white plays knight f3, developing a kingside piece and also taking control of this d4 square as well as the other center square, which is e5. Now black responds with knight f6. Well, he is also playing with a similar idea that since white is controlling this important square with his pawn, so black is also playing in a symmetrical way and taking control of the central squares by his kingside knight. Now because black's last move has taken control of these light squares, white reinforces the control of these squares by playing knight to c3. Black responds in a similar manner with knight to c6. So as you can see from this setup, both the players are really fighting hard to take control of these center squares. White is controlling with his pawn and the two knights, while black is controlling with this pawn and his two knights. Since the fight for the center has already begun, it is very common for one of the players to play either d4 or for black to play d5 to begin a fight over the control of the center squares. And because all of these moves bring the four knights out and form a symmetry, it is therefore this variation is called as symmetrical four knights. Now let's look at the second main line in the symmetrical defense, and that is the ultra-symmetrical line. In this line, white focuses on taking control of the light squares, whereas black focuses on taking control of the dark squares in the center. So let's look at the move order. White starts with c4, black plays c5, and now white is aiming to control the light squares. He brings out his knight to c3, taking control of these two important light squares in the center. Black responds in a symmetrical fashion, playing knight c6, taking control of the dark squares of the center. White now plays g3, preparing to fianchetto his kingside bishop. Black plays g6, preparing to fianchetto his dark square bishop. And now white plays bishop to g2, taking control of these light squares on this diagonal, mainly focusing on these two central squares. and also discouraging black to play d5 and fight for the center. Black now replies with bishop g7 with the same idea that he's now taking control of the dark squares on these diagonals, mainly focusing on these two center squares, and also discouraging white to play d4 and fight for the center. Now it is observed that this kind of a setup usually leads to a very slow game. Now let's look at the third important line in the symmetrical defense, and that is the hedgehog defense. In the hedgehog defense, it is seen that both the players try to take control of these light squares. Let's look at the move orders. White begins the game with c4, black responds with c5. Now because black has taken control of this important d4 square, white plays knight to f3, taking control of these two dark squares. Black plays knight f6, trying to take control of these two light squares here. White now plays knight to c3, strengthening his control for these light squares. Now black starts to fight for the light squares by playing e6, taking control of this important d5 square. White now plays g3, preparing to fianchetto his bishop. Black now, instead of playing g6, he now plays b6 so that he can fianchetto his light square bishop and take control of this light square diagonal. White plays bishop g2, taking control of this diagonal. Black plays bishop b7, taking control of these diagonals. Both these bishops, if you see, they are trying to control this diagonal as well as keeping an eye on these two important light squares which are located in the center of the board. White is now ready to castle, and now black is also getting prepared to castle by playing bishop to e7. Now as you can see, from this setup, white and black, both the players are keeping a very strong control on this diagonal, especially these two important center squares. All these pieces are keeping an eye on these squares, and as you can see, even black is doing the same with his pawn over here, this knight sitting here, and this bishop. Black's position do look a little cramped, but he can soon start a counter attack at the right time in the game. In such a setup, black's idea is to exchange white's d pawn with black's c pawn and then to take control of this half-opened c file by his queen and his rook. I'm sure you're really enjoying this video learning this English opening in detail. So subscribe to my channel if you want to learn similar such chess openings. Now let's look at the second type of the main line in the English opening, and that is the reversed Sicilian. Now most of you must already be aware of the Sicilian opening, which starts from the move e4 and black playing c5. So here white is taking control of the center with one of his center pawns, whereas black is taking control of the center with one of his side pawns. So this setup is known as the Sicilian opening in chess. So coming back to our topic, English opening. So a reversed Sicilian would occur when white would play as black and black would play as white. So here white would try to take control of the center with wing pawns and the move is c4, and black will take the control of the center with one of his center pawns, and that is e5. So because this setup looks like the reversed version of the Sicilian opening, that is why this opening now is called as the reversed Sicilian in English opening. So as an idea you already know, white is taking control of the center with his side pawn, whereas black is taking control of the center with one of his center pawns. In short, white has black's position in the Sicilian but with an extra tempo. By the way, if you want to study the Sicilian opening, then do check out the link that is given in the description box. And now, let's look at some of the main lines in the reversed Sicilian category. So the first one is the closed variation. And the move orders are c4, e5, and now white plays knight to c3, taking control of the light squares with his knight, and black plays knight c6, taking control of the dark squares with his knight. So here, both the players are trying to take control of the center, but neither of the players are trying to attack each other's pawns or pieces. So that is why this setup is called as the closed variation. So here, black plays in a similar fashion as white would play in a closed Sicilian. White would usually try to dominate the queen side of the board, whereas black would try to dominate the king side of the board. Now let's look at another line in the reversed Sicilian, and that is Bremen system. In the Bremen system, white tries to take immediate control of the light squares of the center by fianchettoing his light square bishop on the g2 square. Let's have a look at the moves. White starts with c4, black plays e5, white plays knight to c3, again solidifying the control of these central light squares. Black plays knight to f6, and now white plays g3 with an idea to get this bishop on this square and strengthen the control of these light center squares. Now let's look at the third variation in the reversed Sicilian, and that is the 4 knights variation. As the name suggests, both the players in this setup would try to get their knights out to control these center squares. Let's have a look at the move order. White starts with c4, black plays e5, white plays knight to c3, taking control of the light squares. Black plays knight f6, again taking control of the light squares. White now plays knight to f3, taking control of the dark center squares, and black now plays knight to c6 to control these dark center squares. So since both the players have got their knights out to control the center of the board, and because this is a reversed Sicilian format, it is therefore this opening is called as 4 knights variation of reversed Sicilian in English opening. If you're still watching this video, give a thumbs up, because that shows that you are a patient learner, which is one of the key qualities to become a better chess player. Now let's look at the final variation of the English opening, and that is other lines. And as it goes by the name, that after c4, any other move by black, for example e6, g6, g5, knight f6, and all the other moves go into the other lines category. And among all those, the most popular is the knight f6 move. And this move reminds me of the popular Botvinnik system. In the Botvinnik system, white tries to control the d5 square by forming a pawn triangle on c4, d3 and e4, also getting his knight developed to the c3 square so as to control the d5 square, and fianchettoing his light square bishop on the g2 square to control the d5 square. Now let's see how the Botvinnik system is played by the white. So after c4 and knight f6, white plays knight c3, again solidifying the control of the d5 square. Black plays g6, preparing to fianchetto his bishop. White plays e4, playing a center pawn to control the d5 square. Black fianchettos his bishop. Now white plays g3 to get his light square bishop out. Black castles. White fianchettos his bishop. And now white is dominating the control of the light squares on this diagonal, especially these two squares. Black plays c5. White now is preparing to castle king side, so he plays knight g to e2. And also the second idea is, by getting the knight on the e2 square, white is further supporting this knight sitting over here, because if in any case, if this knight gets captured, white can recapture the piece over here with his e2 knight and thereby not losing his control of the d5 square. Black plays knight to c6. White now plays d3, forming a pawn triangle. By playing d3, white is providing support to these two pawns who are controlling the important d5 square. Black plays d6 and now white castles. So the move order in this setup is really not important as long as you are able to achieve a similar kind of a position. So this system where you form a pawn triangle to control the d5 square, you get your knight on c3 to control this d5 square, and also fianchettoing your bishop to control this d5 square. This is called as the Botvinnik system. Now let's quickly have a look at other lines. The other type of lines are: black may play e6. Idea is, if you are taking control of the d5 square, black also doesn't want to lose the control of this square, and that is why by playing e6, he takes control of this square. Some players might play f5. Well, the idea is, if you are trying to take control of one of the center squares with your wing pawn, black tries to take control of one of your center squares with his other side wing pawn. But ideally, if you ask me if this is a good move, well, no, because this weakens black's king side. So as a black player, you should not. So if you're playing with black, please do not play with this move. And if your opponent plays such a move, well, then be happy because his king side is weakened. So you can take a very good advantage by developing your pieces early and then attacking the king side. Some players might play a move like g6. So the idea is, because a move like c4 delays white's castling, so black is usually thinking of castling ahead in the game and probably launch an attack on you. So that is why he plays g6, so that he can quickly fianchetto his bishop, take control of this dark square diagonal and get his pieces quickly developed and castle. When you play c4, you will also see a lot of players playing c6. Now, what's the idea behind this move? Well, black is planning to play d5 and attack the center because he doesn't want you to take control of this important d5 square. A lot lot of times players also select a move like b6, and the idea is if you are trying to take control of the light square d5, then black prepares to fianchetto his light square bishop and take control of this entire diagonal, which also aims at white's king side. Some aggressive players might also choose to play d5, and the idea is to directly challenge the pawn over here. If white takes, then black can develop a piece with a tempo. And now two of the black pieces are targeting this white's pawn. Well, some players might also choose to reply with g5. Well, this is ideally not a very good move, and if you're playing with white, then ideally you should take control of the center with a move like d4. Ideally, I don't like this move personally, but the idea behind this move is that black is gonna fianchetto his bishop over here and try to take control of this diagonal, especially keeping an eye on this d4 square, which is one of the center squares. So if white now plays d4, black fianchettos his bishop, and now white develops with knight to c3, and now since black defends his undefended pawn with h6, and now white plays e4, taking full control of the center. Let's look at the last line. After playing c4, you will also find few black players trying to gambit in the game by playing b5. Well, if someone plays b5, then be happy and capture this free pawn, because black gave up a pawn for just nothing. Though our c pawn got deviated from here and is now no longer controlling the d5 square, but hey, white can get control of this d5 square with a move like e4 or knight to c3 or even fianchettoing this bishop. So white is doing fine, and white have just earned a free pawn for nothing. I know a lot of you watching this video are dreaming of becoming either an international master or a grandmaster. So if you are really serious about chess, then I would recommend reading this book called The Opening Repertoire, the English by David Cummings. I have one more interesting chess book for you called as The Iron English, written by Simon Williams. And if you are looking to become a grandmaster or a super grandmaster, then I would highly recommend to refer to all the 3 volumes of the Grandmaster Repertoire written by Mihail Marin. And besides this chess opening, if you want to master the other chess openings and want to improve your game of chess in general, then do join one of the membership programs I have for you. By the way, if you want to buy any of these chess books, then refer to the links given in the description box. And now is the time for the question of the day. If white wants to play the English opening, what move he should play? Give your answers in the comments box, and I'll see you in the next video. Until then, keep learning and keep practicing.